I don't spend a lot of time talking about curriculum because I've learned over the years that curriculum, it's a tool, but it's not the most important thing. The thing that matters the most is your relationship with your child, the atmosphere in your home, and being consistent. Consistently moving forward a little bit, making progress every day. Those are the things that make the biggest difference. My name is Sherry, Christian, wife, and thankful mom to 10 incredible kids. I'm the author of the blog and YouTube channel, Our Life Homeschooling, where I share homeschooling encouragement for everyday moms. I believe that motherhood is ministry, and homeschooling is simply an extension of parenting. My passion is to cheer on other moms who are at home doing the most important work of all, raising the next generation for the glory of God. Hi everybody, it's Sherry from Our Life Homeschooling. I want to talk to you today about how I teach math and give you hopefully some practical tips that you can use in your homeschool. I don't spend a lot of time talking about curriculum because I've learned over the years that curriculum, it's a tool, but it's not the most important thing. A couple of friends, I want to say 5 or 6 of my friends, we all had our oldest child graduate 2 years ago. And we recently got together at a mom's retreat, and this is the one thing we were talking about. We were remembering back to those early years of homeschooling where we were just worried about what kind of curriculum we were going to use, and is it going to be the right one, and what if it doesn't fit my learning style or my child's learning style, or this is what I like about this one. And we just spent so much time worrying about what curriculum was going to be a good fit for us. And by the time we all had graduates, looking back on that time of our life, we realized how insignificant the curriculum is. It's not the most important thing. The thing that matters the most is your relationship with your child, the atmosphere in your home, and being consistent. Consistently moving forward a little bit, making progress every day. Those are the things that make the biggest difference. So I don't spend a lot of time on curriculum. I think moms can get hung up on this, and I don't think it matters so much what you use as much as your desire to learn and your consistent work every day with your child. Curriculum is simply a tool. You can have a curriculum that's really not that great, but you can make it great and you can teach it well. Your kids can still learn. I don't put a whole lot of emphasis on curriculum. I also know that moms, it's like as soon as they see what this other person is doing, then they're like, oh, maybe I should just try that. So they hop on board to that curriculum, and then they see something else because they're that's getting dull, and they move over to that. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that one thing that I've said many times is that there is a lot of benefit to sticking with the same curriculum. Now, that's not a reason that you should never switch if something isn't working. But if your curriculum is working pretty well for you overall, there are so many advantages to sticking with it. It trickles down to all your other kids. There's so much less of a learning curve when you just stay with the same curriculum. Every time you switch, it takes almost a year to learn the new system, just to learn how everything's laid out, how their approach is to math. So there's so much less you have to learn, and you can just move through content, especially when you stick with the same curriculum with math. Now, I don't claim to be any math expert by any means, but what I'm sharing with you is what I've learned in our 15 years of homeschooling. And I do want to make sure to mention that if you are looking for homeschooling resources, book lists, just tons of information about how to get started, large family living, life skills, morning time, any of these things, I have a plethora of resources over on the blog, ourlifehomeschooling.com, where you can find information and encouragement about everything homeschooling. So if there's something I don't cover in this post, I'm sure you will find it on the blog. I have a lot more details on the blog about our family's curriculum. You can probably just search curriculum and there's going to be things that come up. So head on over to the blog if there's something I don't cover here or if you just want more details. When I started teaching math 15 years ago with our oldest, I picked the curriculum Right Start Math. And this is a math program that you can learn by games, by manipulatives. It's a one-on-one lesson that you do with your child every day. And I loved this curriculum. I still love it. The thing I love the most about it was that it uses the base 10 system to teach kids. So it really gives them a good understanding of how numbers work. The only thing I would say that was a big deficiency for me in the Right Start curriculum was that it's very teacher intensive. You have to teach the lesson individually with each child. At this time, we had 3 in school, but we also had a toddler and a baby. So I had 5 kids, and it was just not as feasible for me to do 3 individual math lessons with each child. This became more and more difficult to do, and I realized I had to do something else. I was forced. Our family was growing. Another problem I had with Right Start at this time was that there was not enough written work, written practice. So while I said in the beginning, there's so many benefits to not switching curriculum. Obviously, this curriculum was not working for us, and I really did have to switch. It wasn't just that there were some things I didn't like about it. This was pretty much the only curriculum switch I've ever made in math. After that, we stuck with the same thing. So we moved from Right Start to Singapore, which is what we're still doing today. The reason I picked Singapore was that my kids were able to do it mostly on their own. They were able to progress very easily, and I didn't have to teach each lesson individually. Now, I will say with Singapore, you can teach each lesson. They have lessons there, and they have just instructions for what to say and how to introduce each lesson to your kids. I don't use them. I use them if I need them. When my kids are learning a new concept, they'll come to me and I'll use them, but you don't have to. Your kids can move through pretty well on their own. So we've been using Singapore for several years, and our kids are pretty independent. The thing that I love about it is that it's simple. There's not a lot of fluff. And so this is the curriculum that we've stuck with over time. One thing that I think is so important with math. Math is a skill. So your child should be doing math every day. Every day you should do some reading, writing, and math. That's kind of what I aim for. Even when I'm in survival mode, when we've just had a baby, if we have a couple weeks where we just have to get through it, I always say reading, writing, and math every day. All the other stuff is extra. If you're reading aloud to your child, they are getting other things, other subjects in there. But reading, writing, and math is foundational. So we try to do math every day. And I don't aim to get through level 1 in first grade. We have a completely different approach. Our kids are making progress every day. Every day we're moving forward and doing a little bit more. This has been such a relieving way to look at math and learning in general. It's kind of erased grade levels for us. Our kids are just where they're at and they're moving forward. One thing that has helped me more than anything else, and this doesn't have to be just with a curriculum like Singapore, you can do this with other curriculums as well, is to move my kids toward independence. So they get a checklist. When they're working on their independent work, they have a checklist, and when they come to math, they get out their math, they look it over and try to understand it. If it's a new concept, I am more of a facilitator. So when they come to something new, they bring it to me and I will help explain it to them. I'll get out some manipulatives, whatever they need, and we'll move on from that point. But once they understand the concept, this is their work. They're finishing the lesson. And one thing my kids, I noticed when we switched from Right Start to Singapore, one thing they did love was that they took ownership of their work. And they could tell when the lesson was going to be finished. They could see how much they had to do for it to be done. And I really believe in short lessons. We don't waste a lot of time doing the same problem 15, 20 times when they get it the first 4 or 5 times. It's just not necessary. One thing that is definitely really helpful when you're teaching math is to have some kind of hands-on manipulatives. And this is something that Right Start had a lot of, and it kind of helped me. The one benefit that I had, and maybe I would have had this if I had used any curriculum, was that I learned from Right Start how to teach math. Even though I had been a public school teacher, I would say looking at the homeschool curriculum really taught me more about teaching math than anything else. Right Start gave me a lot of ideas about how to teach math. And so when my kids would come to new things, I had an idea of how to break it down. And with young kids, it really is helpful to have just some concrete objects because they think that way. It's hard for them to move from the concrete to the abstract. So they need to see something right in front of them. And I'll just give one example is when my 3-year-old calls my husband on the phone. She will call him and talk to him, and she is just talking about all the things that are right in front of her. These flowers and the baby doll, and mommy has cookies, and she just mentions whatever is right in front of her. So that's how kids think. So if we can start with something concrete and then help them move to the abstract. So I have used an abacus is something I use to teach all of my kids. We use base 10 blocks. These are great for helping them understand place value in tens, hundreds, thousands. Flashcards, especially for computation skills, super important for them to know their math facts. I've used some counters, or we have these colored squares that they can make patterns with, or they can count. Those are handy. We have some place value cards, which it just doesn't take them long, that once they see how to make numbers with these place value cards, then they can understand place value and they can put them together and it makes sense in their mind. They can tell you how many tens are in 100, how many tens are in 1,000, how many ones are in 1,000. I use base 10 blocks and place value cards to teach those. It was just really handy. And then just even playing cards. I've used regular playing cards. You can do Uno or Dutch Blitz cards to teach different colors. I've used that with my preschooler. We'll just flip over the card and put it into the pile of its color. Those are great for very young children. But having some kind of math manipulative to use to teach them is really helpful. On a practical note, I think the most important thing, like if you're gonna worry about anything, and you shouldn't be worrying about things. Moms always worry, am I doing enough? It seems like we're missing this or that. And I think if you are watching this video, if you are asking those questions, you're doing enough. Just remember that it takes much less time to teach someone a concept one-on-one than it takes for one teacher to teach 20, 25 kids. So when you finish your homeschool in a couple hours, when you finish your math in a half an hour or 15 minutes or an hour, whatever it takes you, you have done enough. You're doing enough. You're just making progress. So don't worry about if you're doing enough. But if you should focus on one thing, and I've heard this from several different places, to move on to higher math, the most important thing is to have strong computation skills. So to know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, to be very strong in those skills. And then once you know your addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, once you know that really well, to be able to transfer that into fractions, decimals, and percents. If you have good skills in first the computation skills, and then secondly, using that multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction to perform problems with fractions, decimals, and percent, you have the basics of what you need to perform higher level math. Now, a lot of the peripheral subjects, math subjects like teaching money, teaching measurement, time, perimeter, geometry, understanding angles. All those things, those are in our math curriculum. We spend time on those, we do those. But I will say, there is so much that can be learned about those things just through real life. My kids have learned more about money from just using money and earning money and spending money, going with me to the bank, going with us to the store. So that when it comes to teach money, a lot of times they just already know that stuff. Same thing with time. They're asking, they know what time of day we do different things because we have routines. And so when it comes time to teach time, a lot of times they understand how that works and it doesn't take as long. Now, as I say that, I can think of many times myself when I had maybe a first grader and they were coming to that section on learning time in their math book. And they just weren't developmentally there yet. They hadn't been asking questions or looking at the clock or wondering about time at all. And so then to try to teach that child this next 10 pages of time, it was grueling. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I've learned that when this happens, it's so much better to wait until the next year. Wait 6 more months until they're interested in it. And then you can teach them how to tell time in like 5 minutes because they want to know. So I think that makes a lot of sense with a lot of these peripheral math subjects, that if you don't need to spend, 3 or 4 worksheets teaching them left from right. Just go out walking every day, go out with your bike, and they'll ask you, do we turn left or do we turn right? When it comes to some of these subjects, we don't need to do endless worksheets on them. A lot of them they can learn through real life. Since computation skills are super important, I'll just give you a couple of practical suggestions for how I teach these to my kids. With addition and subtraction, I start with the number 10. We get an abacus out, we get the number 10, and we learn all the numbers that make 10. So 1 and 9, 2 and 8, 3 and 7, 5 and 5, 4 and 6. And we play games with these. We get out cards, any kind of playing cards. You can, as long as you have numbers 1 through 10, 0 through 10, you can play matching games or old maid games with making a match with the numbers that make 10. Once this is really familiar to them, we move on to teaching them how to make numbers that make 100. So I will call out the number 23. And they'll have to use what they know about making the number 10 to make the number 100. And I'll just randomly call out different numbers. And I might start with something easier like 75. And they would have to come up with 25, the opposite number. And then get a little harder with numbers like 23 or 67, that it's harder to find the opposite number. But understanding what makes up a 10 and 100 is just great practice for them. This transfers over to money, then they understand change for $1, change for $10. And then with the rest of addition and subtraction, I use flashcards. There's a ton of strategies you can use to teach your kids how to add and subtract, and I think they can be helpful with the right kind of child who's interested in that. But a lot of times I've tried to teach my kids strategies for adding and subtracting, and they don't want to learn them. They just want to use their fingers or learn on their own. And over time, I've just become okay with that because they're understanding it in their own way. And after they use their fingers for a while, after they figure it out their own way in their head, they can do it without having to count or without having to use anything like their fingers. So I let them do that. I use flashcards, and that's how we learn our addition and subtraction. If you can make a competition out of it, let them compete against their own time. That's also great. For multiplication and division, we learn this through skip counting. So we'll start with 2s, and I'll say, okay, say your 2s to 20, and we'll use an abacus or some kind of counting tiles where they're drawing 2 at a time. A lot of times we play bananagrams. And so if we start with 14 bananagrams, they have to count by 2s up to 14. Anything like that. Count by 2s up to 20. Once they get good at that, count by 2s up to 20 and back again. And then we do that with 3s to 30, 4s to 40. So a young child in maybe first or second grade, third grade, you may just work up to those numbers. And fives are usually pretty easy. And then that may take a while for them to understand that concept. And then gradually, when they're ready for it, move on to 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Count from 9s up to 90 and back again. When you're skip counting, you're starting with addition and moving to multiplication in your head because you're adding 3 more if you're using 3s, counting by 3s. 3s, you're adding 3 more every time, and eventually you understand that you're just multiplying. This has been one of the best ways for me to teach multiplication and division because you're doing both at the same time. They may not realize it, but they're learning division at the same time because these are all the same numbers. I did have a mom ask me a question about how I use Singapore specifically, so I'm going to go into that just a little bit. When I start level 1, my kids can pretty much do level 1, A and B on their own, 2 A and B, and I can check their work. So they finish it, bring it to me, I go through and correct it, or I'll have one of my older kids, if they're sitting right beside it, sometimes they like to correct it. Once they get to level 3A and 3B, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and it's not something you can just easily sit there and correct. So I buy the teacher's manuals for these, and I have the child do the textbook. So they read the lesson in the textbook. They have a separate notebook that they'll write the answers in, just a spiral notebook. And then at the end of the textbook lesson, it has workbook exercise. And so they'll do the corresponding workbook exercise in their workbooks. And that technically would be about a lesson. Now, if it's a little bit longer or harder, I may just have them do the textbook and the textbook problems in their notebook and then do the workbook the next day. But they're pretty much able to do that on their own, and then I do have them check their own work. If I trust the child to be able to check their work, then I have them do that, and it's not been a problem for us. I'll have them check their own work, and then usually I'll just ask them, did you get any wrong? Which ones did you get wrong? And I do have them go back and learn what they did wrong or correct it. Just to me, the important thing is that they understand it. So starting at level 3, it is a little bit more for them, and it takes my kids more than a year to get through level 3A and 3B. And I've learned that's okay. By the time they finish level 6, they are ready for either pre-algebra or algebra. So I moved my older 2 kids right from level 6 into algebra. So it's okay. I always worried like, oh, they're in 7th and 8th grade and they're still doing level 6 of Singapore. Well, that's okay because after that, they're ready for pre-algebra skills. One last practical tip that I want to share with you is that math gets so much easier the more you teach it. It's the hardest with your first child. So if you are struggling and it's your first child that you're teaching math, that is totally normal and it's okay. When I was teaching math to our son Ty and he got to, I want to say 5th or 6th grade, there were some sections of his textbook that I started getting nervous and I could feel my palms sweating. I just thought, oh boy, I don't know how we're going to keep moving in homeschooling because I don't know if I can do this. Well, I just had to look at it a little bit more closely. Sometimes I had to ask someone for help. One time I asked a friend whose husband was a math teacher on a specific problem. Once he explained it, it made total sense. I got better at math, and I also got better at teaching math, at breaking it down in a way that is easy for other people to understand. And that's what's going to change. The first time with your oldest child, you're just kind of remembering these skills again, and sometimes it can be a little scary. But with your second child, you see it again, and you're like, oh yeah, this isn't as hard as as it looks at first sight. And then your third child, you're just like, oh yes, okay, let me explain how to break this down. And another thing that's really helpful to know is that long division and double and triple digit multiplication, this is a big step for kids. So when they start doing this in whatever grade it is for your child, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever it is, when you start double digit multiplication and long division, it's just a big step. So if you know that ahead of time, if you know that it's just a big jump for them, some kids have to see things over and over again, and it just takes a couple days. And that's how it is with these specific concepts. You show it to them the first day, it's a little overwhelming. Sometimes they cry. You show it to them the second time and you're like, now let's just watch, just observe. It may take several days and they just have to see it repeated, and then the light will come on and they'll get it. I hope these tips have been helpful for you. Math can be kind of daunting for homeschool moms to teach, but I hope this just gives you a lighter way to look at it and can maybe just give you some ideas to use if you're struggling with math. If you like this content, I encourage you to take a look at the video I did last week. It was a day in the life video just showing what homeschooling looks like in our home. We did some picture study, we did a little Reformation study, and then my high school kids had a volleyball tournament. Thanks for watching. I do one video a week on homeschooling encouragement for everyday moms. I'll see you next week.